I'm Michael Newberry, and I'm the Assistant Director of the museum here at Ypsilanti Historical Museum. And my favorite item is this World War I tunic. This tunic is actually unique in that it was not an issue tunic. The tunic that this resembles most is a 1917 AEF tunic that would have been worn by the soldiers over in France during World War I. But this is cut of finer cloth, and it was tailored privately. The unique feature about these buttons is that they are not made of metal like the ones that would have been on uniforms that were worn in the field. These are made of a bakelite substance. They're like a brown plastic, but they have the same stampings. They have an eagle on them, just like the issue ones. But this is one telltale sign of a private purchase coat. And this particular jacket, you see a fair number of these in the collector's market and they're in such nice condition because these were worn at the Victory Parade. These particular tunics that were tailored privately, that had the bakelite buttons, were pretty much reserved for the Victory Parade in Europe and in America when the troops came back in 1919. You know, it's of such nice material you wouldn't see this in the field. If you go and if you decide yourself you want to buy a World War I jacket, usually this is the kind that you will come across is the ones that were worn in the parades, not the actual combat ones, because those got so beat up. I think we got a couple upstairs.
Do we know who this may have belonged to?
We don't have a name, but we do know that whoever it was, A, they lived through the war to partake in the parade. B, they were a sergeant in the medical field. So they're in the medical corps. That is denoted by this wool patch, the 3 sergeant's chevrons. That indicates his rank. And then there is in gold embroidery, is the medical symbol. This is a medical corps pin. Another thing that we can tell about him, the patch on the left shoulder is the medical corps patch, all in wool. Other things that are telling about this person, this red chevron that you see on the left sleeve is called a discharge chevron. So upon being discharged from service, after they came home, they were given this, and they would put it on the uniforms for the parade. So he served his time, and he survived, and he came back home, and he was discharged, and that signifies that. On towards the cuff of the left sleeve, you see a pair of chevrons, and they were done in gold wire embroidery. It's pretty faded now, but it would have looked gold. And these were overseas chevrons. So each single chevron indicated 6 months of overseas service, typically in France. So this gentleman served overseas for 1 year because he has 2 6-month chevrons. He was discharged from service, so he has his discharge chevron. He served in the medical corps. as a sergeant. And you know, these uniforms, although they were privately made, they still had to conform to federal standards. So you know, the color of the cloth matches. It's finer than the issued ones, but the lining is the same. It's a khaki cotton duct lining with an interior left breast pocket. They still, you know, made sure it conformed to all the standards. It had a standing collar that had wire attachments to keep it closed. It had the traditional 5-button front with 4 patch pockets. These are all you know, indicators of a 1917 issue uniform, tunic. The ones that were issued a year later, called the Pershing jackets, the model 1918, the biggest difference you would see is these would have been slit pockets and not patch pockets, so you wouldn't actually see the body of the pocket, you'd simply see the flap. That's one big indicator of a different uniform type. And that is my favorite object.
And why is it your favorite object?
I've been interested in military history since I was a child. My grandparents served, and I was always fascinated by their stories. From a young age, I collected military equipment and uniforms, and it was always a goal to see how old of a uniform I could collect. And so I would research all of these things as I was collecting. And there finally came a period in my life where I was able to collect World War I uniforms. They're quite expensive by comparison to later periods. And I guess it just kind of took off from there. It just began with fascination with my grandparents' stories, and it just kind of went on. You know, that also inspired me to, you know, apply for and go to the United States Military Academy at West Point. So it's all interrelated, and I have quite a personal collection that I haven't looked at in a long time. But
it's amazing.
But I never forget this stuff. It's always fascinating. If someone wanted to purchase a World War I tunic like this one that you see here, you could expect to pay anywhere from $65 to $125 just for the jacket. It would really depend on the condition and what patches there are. A sterile tunic would be one that has no patches of any kind. They call it a sterile tunic. And if it was used, you could probably purchase it for $60 to $70. But then again, you know, prices change with inflation. I purchased mine for roughly that same price in 2005. But at the same time, there were really nice examples of victory tunics that had all the patches, very, very desirable patches, you know, ribbon bars, things like that, and all the medals, and you know, they were hundreds of dollars. So something like this, though, would easily be in the ballpark of $90 to $100. It's in good shape. It's a fittable size. Often when collectors seek out uniforms, they look for sizes that are fittable for like an average human being, but typically the market is flooded with undersized pieces, because those are the ones that were surplused and never got issued.
Oh my goodness,
so
how
those
interesting.
stuck around the most.
Makes perfect sense.
Yep.
Wow.
And this appears to be a relatively average size, so it would probably hold its value better than an undersized item.
Shoulders look a little narrow.
Yeah,
actually.
they do, and you know, and but it is also a reflection of who served. These were young men.
True.
You know, and it also reflects different eating habits. You know, people had a very different diet back then, and were often of a different build, and this reflects that too.
You just read that coat like a book.
Yeah.
And you just told me a whole story that I had no idea about.
Yeah. One of the things I always found fun about these, whenever I get a new uniform, I check the pockets.
Oh.
And I found a pair of dog tags in one once. I found a bunch of pipe tobacco and stick matches in another.
Cool.
You know, it's telling of what that person was like sometimes.
I know there's an incredible amount of forgery in Civil War artifacts. Is that true of uniforms too?
It is definitely true of uniforms.
Really?
One thing that a lot of people that deal in military uniforms tend to do is they will purchase as many of the uniforms that have no patches on them as they can. So they can then go out and find the patches and then sew them on. Because all these patches were sewn on by hand. See, and you know, they weren't particularly They weren't done by a particularly talented seamstress either. They were often done by the individual. And it's easier to acquire authentic patches separately from the uniform. So that's how they beef up a uniform. They'll get a sterile tunic, and then they'll fill it up with very desirable patches and sell it for a profit. So that's unfortunate, and sometimes it's very difficult to tell if it's been done, because if you have two authentic items, you know, the only way you could tell is by looking at the thread to see if they used the proper thread, or if they used modern thread, or sometimes if the uniform has faded significantly, you can see ghost imaging from removed patches. You know, you could get a sense that there was a different setup of patches there, perhaps. This, I'm fairly certain, is not such a case, because while these are certainly amazing examples of patches, they aren't particularly rare or hard to find, so it's safe to assume that this jacket is original, and all of its component parts came with it.